Dawn in the Everglades. At dawn in the Florida Everglades, something strange began to stir among the grass. They looked like harmless rabbits, soft, shivering, and perfectly still. But what lurked beneath their fur wasn't alive. Mist clung to the sawgrass as the first light touched the black water, and there they were. Dozens of tiny shapes scattered across the wetland, their ears pricking the breeze, their bodies warming beneath solar panels that glittered like jewels. Officials had quietly released them by the hundreds, each one powered by the sun and built for a chilling purpose: to attract the Everglades' most unstoppable predator. Locals called it madness. Scientists called it genius. But when the first cameras started rolling, what they captured changed everything. The question hanging over the swamp that morning was simple and terrifying. Had Florida just outsmarted nature or unleashed something it couldn't control? Chapter 1. The Silent Invasion. The Everglades at dawn shimmer like a living mirror. Sawgrass shimmers over still waters. Herons stand motionless, stitched to the landscape like statues carved from patience itself. But beneath that beauty lies one of America's most devastated ecosystems. For decades, this vast wilderness has been under silent attack. The invader is not a pollution spill or an urban development project. It is alive, coiled, and utterly unstoppable. The Burmese python, a predator born in the jungles of Southeast Asia, has turned Florida's wetlands into its own private empire. The invasion didn't begin as an accident of nature, but as a slow, stupid, and irreversible human mistake. In the 1980s and 90s, the exotic pet trade flourished in the United States, and baby pythons were sold as harmless curiosities, glittering, beautifully patterned, docile enough to rest in a child's hands. But those pets grew up. Within a few years, many grew to between 15 and 20 feet, powerful enough to crush a deer or fight an alligator to the death. Unprepared owners began releasing them into canals, swamps, and backyards, one snake at a time, each a seed. Then, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida like the wrath of something ancient, destroying reptile facilities and releasing countless snakes into the wild. These escapes seeded the population that would later engulf the Everglades. The python's new world was paradise. The Everglades offered year-round warmth, endless cover, and prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. With no natural predators and the ability to lay up to 100 eggs a year, the population exploded. Biologists now estimate that tens of thousands roam South Florida, perhaps more, hidden in a landscape too vast and intricate to count. What they've done to the food chain is catastrophic. In areas dominated by pythons, raccoons have all but disappeared. Opossums are gone. Swamp rabbits, once so common you could see them on every trail, have been wiped out from entire regions. Even deer and bobcats, creatures built to survive, have felt the pressure. A single python was found with a full-grown deer inside its stomach, the outline still visible through the stretched scales. In another incident, a python was filmed locked in combat with an alligator. Both died. The loss of these species isn't just tragic, it's systemic. When small mammals disappear, raptors lose their food source. When scavengers leave, decaying bodies linger longer, altering soil nutrients and changing the very chemistry of the land. The Everglades, a fragile web of interdependence, has begun to unravel under the relentless pressure of the pythons. Scientists used to report the presence of swamp rabbits in almost every study. Now there are entire areas where they have vanished. The fight for the Everglades has become a war that humans are slowly losing. Hunters wade chest-deep through the black water, guided by drones and headlamps. But for every python they catch, dozens more hatch unseen, slithering through the reeds before a human foot can get close. Millions of dollars have been poured into culling programs, bounties, and research, but the tide hasn't turned. The pythons have adapted perfectly. Humans are running out of options. Chapter 2. Bounty Houses and Broken Math. When officials realized how unstoppable the situation had become, when the invasion returned, they did what humans often do when faced with a wild problem. They turned it into a competition. Cash prizes, public glory, and the thrill of home. In 2013, Florida launched the first-ever Python Challenge, an open invitation to anyone brave enough to venture into the swamp. The concept was audacious, perhaps even desperate. Arm citizens with basic training, unleash them for a month, and pay for each snake brought back. On paper, it sounded like a victory waiting to happen. In reality, it became a study in human frustration and resilience. The first challenge drew more than 1,600 participants from across the country. Hunters arrived with hovercraft, machetes, and flashlights strapped to their foreheads. Television crews followed, turning the Everglades into a surreal blend of reality show and survival competition. For days, the swamp echoed with the sound of engines and shouts as people scanned the reeds for the telltale glint of scales. The media loved it, but the numbers told a harsher story. After weeks of effort, the combined catch totaled only 68 snakes. 68 out of the tens of thousands believed to roam those wetlands. It was such a small fraction that biologists barely noticed the difference. Florida had no choice but to continue. The Python Challenge became an annual event, with even bigger prizes, more training, and better promotion. The hunters learned from their mistakes, deploying thermal scopes and night vision equipment. Some managed to capture dozens of snakes in a single season. The winners were celebrated like champions. One of them caught a python over 16 feet long. But the scientists' conclusions were always the same. The population curve was still rising. Officials realized that the seasonal competitions were mostly for show and moved toward a more professional strategy. In 2017, the South Florida Water Management District launched the Python Removal Program. This was no longer a game, it was a job. The paid hunters received training, licenses, and an hourly wage with bonuses for each python captured. The longer the snake, the higher the pay. Contractors patrolled the canals at night, searching for movement in the moonlight, their boats gliding through the dark water. It was backbreaking, dangerous, and often lonely work. But it was effective, for a while. The number of pythons removed increased year after year. The wild population didn't decline. It was as if every time you pulled one snake out, two more materialized from the reeds. The math was brutal. Millions of dollars spent chasing snakes across more than 600,000 acres, and the returns kept dwindling. New technologies were tried. Scientists deployed what they called Judas snakes, pythons fitted with radio transmitters to guide hunters to breeding grounds. It helped, but only a little. The Everglades were simply too vast, too tangled, too full of places for a cold-blooded phantom to hide. By the late 2000s and 10s, officials had to accept a bitter truth. The python threat couldn't be defeated by human effort alone. No matter how skilled or relentless the hunters were, they couldn't compete with a creature designed to be invisible. It was like trying to prune a wildfire with shears. Every hunt, every capture, every bounty paid, it was all just that. So the question shifted. If hunters couldn't beat the snakes, could something else outsmart them? The answer began with a swishing tail and a powerful nose. Chapter 3. Truman and Eleanor, the sniffer dogs. When bounty programs failed to make a dent, wildlife managers realized they needed a new kind of hunter, one that relied not on sight, luck, or stamina, but on pure instinct. In 2020, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched a small but audacious experiment. 2 dogs, trained as detectives, would be sent into the swamps to do what humans couldn't: smell the invisible. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, had the calm face of a family pet, but the focus of a soldier. Eleanor, a Dutch shepherd with alert amber eyes, was bred for precision and courage. For months, they were trained to recognize the faint, musky scent Burmese pythons leave behind, a scent humans can't detect, but that lingers in the grass and mud long after the snake has passed. The trainers hid pythons in boxes, in tall grass, even under waterlogged logs, until the dogs could find them every time. Once in the field, they worked on long leads, the handlers following closely with GPS trackers as the dogs sniffed, stopped, and pulled at unseen targets. The results came quickly. In their first month, the duo helped capture several large snakes that had eluded human teams for weeks. Truman's tail would stiffen. Eleanor would circle, nose down, and suddenly freeze, the universal sign that prey was near. Moments later, the beam of a handler's flashlight would catch the slow ripple of scales. It was astonishing to see. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes where biologists had searched for hours. The news spread quickly among the agencies. For the first time, it felt as if humans had a fighting chance. But victories in the Everglades always come at a price. The swamp is brutal, scorching, humid, and dangerous in every direction. The sawgrass cuts to the quick. The water hides caimans and water moccasins that can kill with a single bite. The handlers had to equip their dogs with cooling vests, protective boots, and constant water breaks. Even so, the work was grueling. But despite the difficulties, the canine teams revealed something extraordinary, a pattern. Every time they tracked a python, the scent trail led to nests, clusters of eggs, or other snakes hidden nearby. This discovery suggested something more, something broader, a map of the invasion. Scientists began plotting these findings, identifying breeding grounds they had never known existed. The dogs weren't just catching snakes, they were exposing the structure of the problem. Still, no matter how effective Truman and Eleanor were, two dogs couldn't cover more than 600,000 hectares. Scaling up the program would require hundreds of teams, millions in funding, and constant maintenance. The method was brilliant but small scale, a tool, not a solution. The dogs had proven one thing clearly: creative tactics worked. But the Everglades demanded more than strength or instinct. Their success opened a new and unavoidable question. If scent could attract the snakes, what if bait drew them even closer? Could the very thing they hunted become the key to victory? That question would lead scientists down a disturbing path, one that blurred the line between biology, ethics, and desperation. Chapter 4. Live Bait and Moral Lines. Desperation breeds innovation and sometimes controversy. After years of failed hunts and limited success with detection dogs, scientists in Florida found themselves staring at a difficult truth. To defeat the pythons, they needed to understand what the snakes wanted most. The answer was simple and unsettling. They wanted rabbits, specifically marsh rabbits, once among the most common mammals in the Everglades, now nearly exterminated. The next question was as risky as it was audacious. Could live rabbits lure pythons out of hiding? At first, the idea provoked outrage, but for some biologists, it was an inevitable next step. Pythons are ambush predators, attracted by scent and heat more than just movement. In small, controlled studies, researchers built secure enclosures along marshy trails and placed live rabbits inside. The enclosures were designed to protect the animals from direct attacks while still allowing their scent and heat to diffuse into the surrounding environment. What happened next astonished the teams. Within weeks, the pythons began to appear, one after another. Another example. At a single study site, more than 20 snakes slithered into the enclosures over the course of a few months. The rabbits, terrified but unharmed behind wire barriers, had become magnets for one of the most elusive predators on Earth. The findings were undeniable. The presence of rabbits could concentrate the python's activity, making them easier to locate and capture. It was the first real evidence that attracting prey could succeed where brute force hunting had failed. But the success came at a moral cost. Images of live rabbits, twitching surrounded by constrictors, sparked outrage from animal welfare groups and even scientists within the project. Public pressure mounted. Critics labeled the experiments barbaric, arguing that no species, no matter how invasive, justified sacrificing innocent animals. Officials were forced to respond, and soon funding for the live bait trials was withdrawn altogether. However, it was the cancellation of the program that made the next breakthrough possible. The principle had been established. It was the method, not the goal, that needed fixing. The next question was obvious. Could they mimic the smell, heat, and subtle movement of a marsh rabbit without using a live creature? Engineers, biologists, and conservation technology specialists began collaborating, merging wildlife science with robotics. They studied every sensory trigger that attracted a python: infrared heat signatures, thermal contrast against the cool marsh air, and the faint, musky scent of the mammal's fur. Every detail was treated as a data point for a mechanical replica. The rabbit blueprint was born. Chapter 5. The Robo-Rabbits. Engineering the Decoy. Scientists envisioned a tough decoy that could emit heat, release synthetic scent, and replicate the nervous movements of a real rabbit. It wasn't just about attracting pythons, it was about capturing data. Every encounter could be filmed and recorded by built-in cameras and sensors, turning the decoy into a field researcher in itself. The project moved quietly from concept to prototype, shielded by the controversy that had preceded it. For the first time, technology offered a way to fight back without killing. But one question remained. Would the snakes fall for the trap, or would they sense the deception beneath the fur? That answer came soon enough, when Florida unleashed its first army of robotic rabbits into the wild. When the first batch arrived in the Everglades, few believed the experiment would work. At dawn, the prototypes looked almost comical. Small, fur-covered decoys bristling with wires, sensors, and tiny solar panels glimmering in the mist. But these were no toys. Each one represented years of frustration, innovation, and millions in funding. They were designed to fool a predator that had outsmarted every trap so far. Engineers called them robo-rabbits. Wildlife officers called them a last hope. Each decoy was a marvel of practical design. Constructed from weather-resistant polymers, covered in synthetic fur and layers of heat pads, they emitted a heat signature nearly identical to that of a live swamp rabbit. Tiny scent emitters released a chemical compound that mimicked rabbit musk, wafting on the swamp breeze. Even the ears could move, powered by silent micromotors. To a python's heat-sensitive tongue, these machines were indistinguishable from the real thing. Hidden inside was a camera connected to a motion-activated transmitter. Whenever something slithered nearby, the system fired, sending an alert to biologists stationed miles away. Powering it all was sunlight. Each decoy carried a small solar panel connected to rechargeable batteries, allowing it to operate for weeks without maintenance. They were anchored inside protective corrals, enclosures strong enough to withstand curious raccoons, storms, and the occasional alligator. The goal wasn't to kill the snakes outright, but to lure them into monitored areas where trained teams could move in to capture them. Chapter 6. First Contact. When the pythons came. When the first 120 units were deployed to key hotspots, no one expected immediate results. The swamp had crushed optimism before, but this time the Everglades reacted differently. Within days, field cameras began capturing scenes no one had ever witnessed from so close up. Large pythons approached the decoys slowly, tongues flickering, bodies gleaming in the moonlight. Some struck immediately, coiling around the motionless rabbits as if they were live prey. Others hesitated, sensing something amiss, then vanished back into the darkness. Soon, the data began pouring in. The robotic rabbits weren't just attracting snakes, they were mapping their movements. Each camera activation added another point to a growing digital map of python hotspots. Researchers could now pinpoint where breeding females congregated, which channels guided their journey, and what times the snakes were most active. The decoys had become both bait and an intelligence network. In a control room 50 miles from the swamp, a handler named Maria watched her screen as a new alert flashed red. She zoomed in on the feed. A python more than 13 feet long, as thick as her arm, slowly coiling around the torso of a decoy. The rabbit's camera captured every scale, every muscle twitch. Maria reached for her radio. 2 field agents were 10 minutes away. When they arrived, the snake was still there, mesmerized by a synthetic heat it couldn't understand. They captured it in under 3 minutes. Still, challenges remained. Each unit cost approximately $4,000, and surviving the swamp's heat and humidity required constant testing. Funding would determine whether this could scale to a statewide system. But the psychological shift was priceless. For the first time in decades, researchers felt they were on the offensive, the invisible war, the Everglades exhale. Somewhere among the reeds, a sensor flickers. Data flows back to labs where scientists study not only where the sensors are located, but also their location. The focus isn't on the snakes themselves, but on how they think, how they hunt, and where they might go next. The lures have given Florida something it hasn't had in years, the ability to see the invisible. But questions linger in the humid air. Can technology truly correct a mistake humans made, or does it simply rewrite the rules of the same old fight? If you lure an exposed predator, what else follows? Snakes can adapt, funding can dry up, the swamp can learn new tricks. But for now, the robotic rabbits sit in the grass, moving gently in the sun, waiting for the next shadow to glide across the water. If this kind of deep dive matters to you, leave a comment below. Should technology lead the recovery of wildlife? Or are we just teaching nature to fight a different war? Like and subscribe for more stories where science meets survival. And click the video below to see what happens when another broken ecosystem fights back.